It's almost unanimous that Breath of the Wild is already a top contender for Game of the Year. Its freedom in exploration, combat, and puzzle solving has set a new precedent for the series. However, in order to allow all this freedom, Nintendo had to ditch some of the trademarks that made fans originally fall in love with the series. Things like classic items, a linear and fleshed out story, and item-based dungeons were all things that could not be a part of Breath of the Wild, for they would obstruct the player's freedom and force a more linear style of gameplay. In classic Zelda games, players had to find several items throughout the story that are necessary to complete puzzles and dungeons and ultimately complete the game. But in Breath of the Wild, players can do any dungeon in any order, or even skip them completely and go straight to the final fight with Ganon. Due to the game's open world nature, classic items like the hookshot and magic boomerang are not necessary and allow the player to use more natural and diverse methods to face enemies and solve puzzles. Storytelling in Breath of the Wild is vastly different than the series' previous installments. There is a great amount of lore and backstory that the player can go on the hunt to find, but this results in a piecemeal narrative that can at times feel disjointed. There are dozens of great cutscenes that can be found through optional quests, dungeons, and flashback memories. But in a game that can be played for hundreds of hours, players can find themselves only getting a slice of narrative for every 8 to 12 hours of gameplay. The game encourages you to explore its beautiful and living world, but by doing so, it hinders its own narrative. There is simply no way to create a more fleshed out story without retracting on the player's freedom. While these are common criticisms of the game, it is undeniable that Nintendo has vastly improved the gameplay of the series. With the ability to run, jump, and climb nearly every surface in the entire world, Nintendo has set a new standard for the series that is sure to influence their future games and other developers. After putting nearly 100 hours of gameplay into Breath of the Wild, I went back to try some of my other favorite 3D Zeldas. Immediately after loading up my save on Twilight Princess, I quickly pressed the B button to run, and was unfortunately reminded of the lack of mobility that Link has in all of his previous installments. Being limited to climbing certain walls, using a single weapon, and the lack of freedom and exploration all reminded me of why Breath of the Wild is so special. But after watching engaging cutscenes with Wolf Link and Midna, and using magnetic iron boots to walk on the ceiling of the Goron Mines, I was instantly reminded why I also love these linear experiences. This feeling continued after revisiting Wind Waker and Ocarina of Time. While Breath of the Wild certainly has mastered mechanics and the open world, there just isn't anything quite like using the double claw shot to take down the Argorok, or experiencing hours of story-driven conflict against Ganondorf. So, should the series go back to its roots? Yes and no. The lush open world and freedom in combat and puzzle solving of Breath of the Wild should be set as a new standard for the series. I even enjoyed the occasional voice acting that gave a little more personality to certain characters like Sidon or Unibo. But perhaps there is just too much freedom in Breath of the Wild. I feel that creating a more linear story path and a set order of dungeons would create a better told and more engaging story, while also allowing players to play the game the way that they want. The series is certainly at a turning point. I hope that Nintendo can combine what was so great about Breath of the Wild, while also integrating what has made the series so special for over 30 years.